Now let's recap quickly what you learned from the last two examples. If you subtract a positive constant from x before squaring, it has the effect of taking the graph of y equals x squared and shifting it to the right a given number of units. If you add a positive constant to x before squaring, it will have the effect of moving the graph of y equals x squared a given number of units to the left. So now we're going to next look at what effect it has on the graph of y equals x squared if we multiply the x squared by a negative constant. So we're going to look at the simplest case we can consider, which would be y equals negative x squared. Now I want to stress before we fill in the table that the negative x squared actually means, and let me state this here at the top, negative 1 times x squared. So that'll tell us, because of the order of operations, we want to square the x value first, then multiply the result by negative 1. Now you can see that all the y values in the table then will be negative except for when x is equal to 0. So we'll next then plot these points and see what the graph looks like. Now you can see that the graph is sketched below here in red, and because all the y values except for 1 are negative, it shouldn't be any surprise then that the graph will lie in quadrants 3 and 4. Now what effect did it have on the graph of y equals x squared when we multiplied the x squared by negative 1? Well, you can see, I think, that what it did is to reflect or flip the graph of y equals x squared about the x-axis. We also now have a parabola that opens down, which means that the vertex will be a high or a maximum point. So from the graph we can tell that the vertex will be at 0, 0. And the axis of symmetry, which is drawn there in green, is essentially the y-axis. And we know the equation for that will be x equals 0. And the domain for this function, as with the others that we've considered, in fact for any quadratic function that we'll look at, will be all real numbers. So negative infinity to infinity. Now this time for the range, because the vertex is a maximum point and the y value at the vertex is 0, all the other y values will be smaller than that. So we then can say that the range will be everything from negative infinity up to 0 then, including 0. So in general now, when you multiply the squared quantity by a negative constant, it will have the effect of reflecting the graph with respect to the x-axis.